Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. Today, I wanted to talk about how the unconscious or subconscious mind shows up in our relationships and how this is important and why therapy can be helpful in sort of dealing with what does come up. So, what's coming up when we're having arguments in our relationship? What's coming up when we're feeling our boundaries being trampled on or not being honored? What's coming up when we're feeling neglected in our relationships? It's usually what's being triggered inside of us. So when we talk about being triggered, we're actually talking about a nervous system response and a subconscious mind response. And so having those triggers and those responses to our environment and to the interactions that we're having with other people are happening on a physical level and a subconscious or unconscious mind level. So how do we fix it? Well, if we just stay up here in conscious mind thinking, so if we can that kind of think about it in a way where I'll try to make it make sense for people, okay? This whole conscious mind versus unconscious mind versus nervous system, vagus nerve, all this stuff that gets thrown around. If you think about it like your conscious mind is the engine, right? It's where a lot of the work happens to decipher what's going on. However, that engine can only work because it's being fed by other parts of the vehicle. So that an engine by itself can't really do much of anything. It's looking for information from other parts of the vehicle to know what to do, right? It needs different types of inputs in order to know how to respond. Well, so the thing is that our minds aren't entirely like an engine because there's so much at play that we don't really take into consideration because we have this perception that memory is so very clear and that it's like we can look back on our memories like we're watching a movie, and that's not always the case. So that when we're being triggered, if we can't immediately come up with a reason why we're triggered, we search through our conscious mind to try to find the answer, and our conscious mind will sort of come up with the best sort of guess they have as to what it could be. And often it's just trying to make sense of the environment that it's in without recognizing that it hasn't really gotten the input from the nervous system, from the body, and from the subconscious mind that it needed in order to actually figure out what it was triggered by. So that there's almost like this disconnect between the conscious mind and the subconscious or unconscious mind and the nervous system. So what disconnects us from those things inside of us that give us information? Often it's trauma, right? And so depending on the type of trauma, and really trauma is trauma, right? Like, so we need to recognize that for anyone who's experienced something that was overwhelming, that they felt like they had no control over, it went on for too long, and then there was a lack of resources afterwards in order to actually, integrate that trauma, that's when we have these triggered responses in us that show up later, right? So we need to recognize that trauma isn't just an event or thing that happens to us. It's so many more there's so many more aspects. That's why two people can go through the same thing and come out with completely different views or feelings or ways of coping with it because of their different makeup and their previous experiences and their resilience and whether they were resourced during other periods of their life. And so when we consider how does the subconscious or unconscious mind show up in our relationships, it shows up in today's fights as something that actually happened to us or didn't happen for us in our childhood often. And that's not always the case, but it often is. And so when we actually look at, say, an argument between two people, and we really dig down into, well, what is this really about? It's often not about the thing that the people are arguing about. There's something usually deeper at play. So, for instance, if my husband and I are having an argument or disagreement about something, I can be saying that I'm angry that you're not doing this. And my husband's perception is maybe, I do, but you're just not seeing it, or I am uncomfortable doing that, that's why I don't do it. Like, there's so many different things that are going on their end. And so they might get defensive and act in a way that's, sort of like, well, I'm trying, right? You're just not, you're not allowing me to do this, or you're not recognizing my efforts, and yada, yada, yada. And so it can go back and forth, right? So if I'm like, well, yeah, I see your efforts, but it's still not enough, or it's not what I need, or blah, blah, blah. And we can just keep going back and forth, where we're not really meeting each other in the middle, because we're not really talking about what's actually going on. Often for me, it will trigger feelings of unworthiness, or a feeling of being unsafe, right? So because those are feelings that come from another time in my life that were unresolved, or at least not resolved in a way that they don't still pop up from time to time. And if I don't know that about myself, then when it does happen and I am triggered, I'm still going to be in this mindset that the argument is about this, when really it's about this, right? Does that make sense? So I'm not really arguing about what's actually going on in the moment. I'm arguing or wanting or needing to be heard around the thing that is the deeper issue, in that your actions or inactions have me feeling unheard, unworthy, and unsafe. And that's often what a lot of arguments and disagreements will be around, just maybe feeling unheard, unsafe, unworthy, all those feelings that can, that we carry with us often from our childhood, right? So that when they come up in our relationship and we're not recognizing that that's actually what's at play, then we think we're fighting about the fact that they didn't do the dishes, when really it's about the fact that maybe you've had discussions around, and I'm not saying that this is what's going on with Donnie and I. That's an old that's an old argument. So yeah, we've had those kind of arguments around, like, I'm the only one doing the dishes, right? But really what I was saying was, I feel that I'm the one carrying all of this burden. It wasn't just the dishes. It was the burden that I felt that I was carrying, and I felt unheard when I expressed that. And I also felt what was actually coming up for me was this feeling of being unworthy of your efforts and attention to help me with this overwhelm, with this feeling of burnout, with this, you know what I mean? So I was coming with the symptoms of burnout, and I was expressing it, well, if you did more of A, B, and C, then I wouldn't feel so burnt out. But what I was really expressing was, I feel that you don't care enough about me to actually hear me when I'm expressing my feelings of burnout. And so once we got to that place where I was expressing, this is what I'm actually feeling, then it became easier for Donnie to actually meet those needs. So that not only did he help out more with the household stuff, but he actually heard what I was saying and tried to relieve the emotional burdens from me sometimes, right? Tried to take some of that weight off of my plate and, distribute it more evenly, because we are a partnership between the two of us, so that I wasn't the only one carrying the emotional load of our household, as well as most of the household chores, right? So but I had to be able to get to that place within myself where I could recognize, or at least question, what's actually being triggered here, what's coming up for me, so that I could actually share that with my spouse. And that work, the getting to the point of, what is being triggered inside of me, that work actually happened in the therapeutic sessions, where I worked with a colleague in counseling hypnotherapy, to get to that point of understanding that those were the things that come up for me from my childhood, and that keep sort of resurfacing even in adulthood and showing up in my relationship now, but that until they were sort of acknowledged and accepted and seen and heard, that it was just a lot of, defensive back and forth, neither one of us really sort of seeing the other person's side, and just, because it's easy to brush off a symptom like, you never do the dishes. Well, I do this and this and this, right? So it's easy to kind of brush that aside as like, oh, I get it. You want me to do dishes more, but I can't do dishes more because I'm so busy doing these things, right? That would be sort of the defensiveness that I would get. That's completely, that's understandable, but that's completely different than me saying, what's coming up for me is that I'm feeling unheard and that I'm feeling unworthy. It's a little harder to brush that aside if you actually care about the person that you're with, right? So let's get real about what's going on. And the way that we do that is through the exploration of, what's really at play in our relationships. And that can happen in a therapeutic session. So please feel free to reach out to me if you're feeling like you keep sort of having these arguments come up in your relationship. It might be around different things, but the sensations are the same. There's a sense of knowing that this is a pattern, but not knowing how to break it, right? So we might have all kinds of insight around, this is what's coming up for me, and this is how it shows up in my relationship. But then there's sort of like that stop where you're like, okay, but now what? Now what do I do with this knowledge, right? And that's where the counseling hypnotherapy can come in. And so I offer free consultations for us to talk about what's going on with you and to discuss how we would get you moving forward through that, that stuck phase of like, okay, I know this, but how do I change it? How do I change the dynamic of my relationship? How do I change the way that I internalize things? How do I change the way that I feel when... Or not change the way you feel, accept the way that you feel when these feelings are coming up. Because we don't necessarily need to change them. They're valid for us. We need to acknowledge them and to recognize the truth of what's really going on in order to stay present with that, and then to actually have more nuanced conversations around our relationship issues, right? So I hope this helps. And I hope that you'll reach out if you feel like you are ready for some help in getting through burnout, the relationship burnout, work burnout, caregiver burnout, whatever kind of burnout you're experiencing. Feel free to reach out to me because I can help. Thank you. Namaste.